The flashbulbs were blinding, but not as blinding as Arthur Vance's hubris. On the night of his 20th anniversary, from the stage of the opulent Astra Tower he believed he built, he raised a crystal glass. But the toast wasn't to his wife, Eleanor. It was a eulogy for her relevance. He called her his anchor, a word that sounded like a compliment, but was delivered like a sentence. He smirked as the crowd tittered, soaking in the spotlight. He had no idea that this anchor wasn't just holding him steady. She was the one who had designed the harbour, built the fleet, and charted the maps. And he had just given her the signal to scuttle his ship. The Astra Tower's grand ballroom was a monument to Arthur Vance's ego. Soaring 50 stories above the city, the room was a symphony of glass and brushed steel, with panoramic views that made the skyline look like a carpet of diamonds. Tables were draped in silver linen, each bearing an impossible sculpture of orchids and white roses. The guest list was a calculated roster of power. Mayor David Chen was schmoozing by the champagne fountain. Senator Harrison was in a deep, head-nodding conversation with a rival developer, Ethan Reed, and scattered throughout were the bankers, lawyers, and media figures that made up Arthur's world. Arthur Vance moved through this crowd not like a host, but like a monarch. His suit was a custom Tom Ford, his smile was 1,000 watts, and his handshakes were firm and proprietary. He was at the absolute peak of his life, and this 20th anniversary gala was less a celebration of his marriage and more a coronation of his success. And then there was Eleanor. Eleanor Vance was a study in quiet contrast. While Arthur was a supernova, she was the calm, dark space between the stars. She wore a deep emerald gown, elegant and timeless, but it was designed to deflect, not attract, attention. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple chignon. She was standing near a marble pillar, observing. She watched Arthur work the room, a faint, unreadable expression on her face. She saw him laugh, a booming sound, as he clapped the shoulder of a banker. She saw the new, ambitious head of communications, Serafina Hayes, drift toward him. Serafina was everything Eleanor was not. She was a blaze of scarlet silk, her blonde hair perfectly tousled, her laugh just a little too loud. She was new, hired 3 months prior, and had already made herself indispensable to Arthur, whispering in his ear, managing his public image, and, as the whispers in the office suggested, much more. Arthur finally spotted Eleanor. He strode over, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea. He pecked her cheek, a dry, papery gesture that smelled of expensive whiskey. "There you are, Ellie," he said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Trying to blend in with the flora again? You should be mingling. This is a party, after all. Our party." "I am mingling, Arthur. I was just speaking with Mr. Henderson about the zoning for the new waterfront project," Eleanor replied, her voice soft but clear. Arthur waved a dismissive hand. "Zoning. Always the details. Leave the boring parts to the lawyers, darling. Tonight, you're supposed to be the queen." He said the word queen, but it sounded like an accusation, as if she were failing at the role. He didn't notice that while he spoke, Eleanor had subtly motioned to a catering captain. She pointed discreetly at Senator Harrison's table, where the senator was looking in vain for a waiter. A moment later, a bottle of 98 Lafitte, the senator's private preference, a detail Eleanor had logged in her mental database, appeared at his elbow. The senator beamed. Arthur, meanwhile, had already turned away, drawn by Serafina's radiant smile. "Arthur, darling," Serafina purred, linking her arm through his. "The press from the Financial Times is here. They want a word about the Q4 projections." "Ah, exactly," Arthur said, puffing his chest. He gave Eleanor a final look. "You see, Ellie, the Empire never sleeps. Try to. Enjoy yourself." He let Serafina lead him away, his hand lingering on the small of her back. Eleanor watched them go. She did not look hurt. She did not look angry. She looked like an engineer watching a complex piece of machinery begin to spark, a critical failure imminent. She turned her gaze to Marcus Cole, the company's longtime CFO. Marcus was a quiet, unassuming man with steel-grey hair and an accountant's sober demeanor. He was standing alone, nursing a club soda. He caught Eleanor's eye from across the room and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of loyalty, of shared knowledge. He knew exactly who had really spoken to Henderson about the waterfront zoning. He knew who had built the financial models for the Q4 projections Arthur was about to boast about. He, and perhaps he alone in this entire room, knew that Eleanor Vance was not the woman standing in Arthur's shadow. She was the one who had built the tower casting it. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. Arthur's personal assistant, a young, eager man named Robert, tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to welcome the man of the hour, the visionary who rebuilt this city's skyline, and the host of this wonderful evening, Mr. Arthur Vance." The room erupted in applause. Arthur practically jogged to the stage, soaking in the adoration. He took the microphone, his smile blinding. He scanned the room, his eyes landing first on Serafina in the front row, and then, almost as an afterthought, on Eleanor, who had remained by her pillar. "Thank you, Robert," Arthur began, his voice like velvet. "Thank you all for being here. 20 years. 20 years. He paused for dramatic effect. The speech was about to begin. Arthur held the microphone like a scepter. The room was his. 20 years ago, he began, his voice resonating with practiced charisma. I was a young man with a dream. I had $5,000 in a checking account, a suit I'd rented, and an idea. An idea that this city, our beautiful city, could be more. That we could reach for the sky. And look at us now. He gestured to the window, to the glittering city 50 stories below. The crowd applauded on cue. He was a master conductor, and they were his orchestra. People talk about success, he continued, and they talk about vision. They talk about drive. And I'll be the first to admit, I have those things. He laughed, and the crowd laughed with him. But they also say, behind every great man, there is a great woman. He paused, and the spotlight swung, finding Eleanor by the pillar. She stood perfectly still, her face a pale oval in the harsh light. Arthur's smile tightened, becoming less of a smile and more of a baring of teeth. And Eleanor, well, Eleanor was there. She was there from the beginning. Weren't you, darling? The tone was wrong. It wasn't appreciative. It was condescending. The air in the room grew thin. Mayor Chen shifted uncomfortably. They say that, but this is the 21st century, Arthur went on, a strange, cruel energy rising in him. He was performing now, not just for the crowd, but for Serafina, who was watching him with undisguised adoration. In the modern age, shouldn't the woman be, well, standing beside him? Or at least keeping up? A nervous titter went through the room. Ethan Reed, the rival developer, leaned back with a smirk, sensing blood in the water. Eleanor, Arthur said, raising his glass directly to her, has always been my anchor. He let the word hang in the air. A steady, reliable anchor. Always there. Always in the same place, keeping me moored. He laughed again, a short, sharp bark. But you can't build an empire from the harbor, can you? An empire is built by sailing. It needs wind in its sails. It needs dynamism. It needs people who understand the speed of now. He then did the unforgivable. He turned his body and his toast away from his wife of 20 years, and aimed it directly at the front table. It needs new blood, new energy. People like our brilliant, dynamic, new head of communications, Serafina Hayes. She understands vision. She understands me. To the future, Serafina. He drank. Serafina, beaming, rose slightly from her seat and raised her glass back to him. The camera flashes were epileptic. They weren't focused on Arthur anymore. They were focused on Eleanor. They were vultures, capturing the precise moment of her execution. But Eleanor Vance didn't cry. She didn't flush with shame or rage. Her face remained pale, her expression unreadable. Her spine, visible against the emerald silk of her gown, seemed to be forged from high tensile steel. For a full 10 seconds, she held the gaze of the room, held the flash of the cameras. Then, with a devastating, regal calm, she placed her untouched champagne flute on the tray of a passing waiter. She did not look at Arthur. She did not look at Serafina. She turned, and with measured, unhurried steps, she walked away from the pillar, across the vast, silent ballroom, and through the grand double doors. The click, click, click of her heels on the marble floor was the only sound in the room. The doors swung shut behind her with a soft whoosh. The silence that followed was absolute. Arthur, still on stage, faltered. The drunken, arrogant high was evaporating, replaced by a cold prickle of something. Confusion? Annoyance? Well, he stammered, trying to recapture the moment. She was probably just tired. A long night. Anyway, to Vance Global, and to the next 20 years. He raised his glass again, but the applause was sparse, mechanical. The spell was broken. He had gone too far. He hadn't just insulted his wife, he had shown himself to be a fool. Across the room, Clarissa Dunn, the formidable CEO of Blackwood Capital, a key investor, stood up, gathered her wrap, and walked out without a word. Arthur didn't see it. He was too busy forcing a smile, blinded by the spotlight he craved, completely unaware that his world had just been unplugged. Arthur woke the next morning to the merciless glare of the sun filtering through his penthouse blinds. His head felt like a split watermelon, pulsing with a dull, whiskey-soaked rhythm. His first emotion was not remorse, it was irritation. "Eleanor," he mumbled, reaching across the vast, empty California King. "Get Robert on the phone. Tell him to move my 10 o'clock." The sheets beside him were cold. He sat up, groaning. The events of the party came back to him in fuzzy, unpleasant snapshots. The speech, the toast, Eleanor walking out. "Damn it," he muttered. So dramatic. Making a scene, all because of a little joke. He swung his legs out of bed, convinced that this was just another of Eleanor's quiet moods. He'd apologize, a breezy, "Sorry you were so sensitive, darling," and she would get over it. She always did. He dressed, bypassing the suit his valet had laid out, and opted for a more casual, in-command look. Charcoal trousers and a crisp blue shirt, sleeves already rolled up. He was in damage control mode, not because he felt guilty, but because he knew the optics were bad. Serafina would have to handle the press. He stepped out of his private elevator into the lobby of the Vance Global building. He walked toward the executive turnstiles, reserved for him and his C-suite. He swiped his all-access keycard. Beep, beep. Access denied. Arthur frowned. He swiped it again. Beep, beep. Access denied. A security guard he didn't recognize looked over. "Problem, sir?" "This damn card," Arthur growled. "It's malfunctioning. You'll have to sign in at the front desk, sir, and use the public elevators." Arthur's face purpled. "Sign in? Do you have any idea who I am?" "Policy, sir," the guard said, unmoved. Fuming, Arthur stomped to the main reception, was forced to show his driver's license like a common salesman, and endured the indignity of the crowded public elevator, which stopped at 3 different floors. By the time he reached his office on the 49th floor, he was a storm cloud ready to burst. His assistant, Robert, leaped from his desk, his face pale. "Mr. Vance, good morning, sir. Get it up here now to fix my keycard and get me a coffee," Arthur snapped, storming into his cavern-sized corner office. "And where the hell is Eleanor? Is she in her office?" Eleanor had a small, functional office on the 45th floor, near the finance department. Arthur rarely visited it. I don't know, sir. She hasn't been in," Robert stammered, following him. "Mr. Vance, there's a problem. You're 10 a.m. with the Blackwood Capital team." "Ah, right. The Meridian deal." "Good." Arthur sat behind his massive mahogany desk. "Tell them I'll be ready. This'll be the biggest deal of the decade." "Sir, it's been cancelled." Arthur froze. "What did you say?" "Cancelled, sir." "We got an email at 8:01 a.m. from Clarissa Dunn's personal office. I printed it for you." Robert handed him a single sheet of paper. It was brutally short. "Mr. Vance, in light of last night's events, Blackwood Capital is postponing our involvement in Project Meridian indefinitely, pending a full internal review of our partnership with Vance Global. Regards, C. Dunn." Postponed indefinitely. "What events?" Arthur roared. "It was a party. Get Clarissa on the phone, now." "Her assistant said she's unavailable, for the week." "Then get Marcus Cole in here." Arthur slammed his fist on the desk. "He'll fix this. He'll call her. They're old friends or something." "Mr. Cole isn't in, sir," Robert said, wringing his hands. "He's not answering his office line or his cell. His assistant just said he's off-site, auditing the assets." "Auditing what?" At 9 in the morning, Arthur felt the first real spike of cold fear. Marcus was never unavailable. He was the most reliable, boringly predictable man Arthur knew. Just then, Serafina Hayes swept into the office, not bothering to knock. She was wearing a tight, professional white dress and looked perfectly fresh. "Arthur, darling, the press is difficult," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "They're all running with the anchor quote. It's trending. But don't worry, I have a plan. We'll release a statement about your shared passion for maritime metaphors and—" "Shut up, Serafina!" Arthur snapped. She recoiled. "What?" "I'm not worried about the press," he lied. "Blackwood just pulled the Meridian deal. That's a $200 million project. I need to see the file. I need to see where our exposure is." He toggled his computer, clicking the icon for the company's internal server. He navigated to the Strategic Projects folder. He clicked Project Meridian. The folder was empty. "What? Robert, where is the Meridian file?" "I don't know, sir. It was there on Friday." "Then find it." Arthur started clicking frantically. He tried the Acquisitions folder. Empty. Zoning Contracts. Empty. Investor Proposals. Empty. "Sir," Robert said, his voice trembling, "the entire strategic drive, it's empty." Arthur stared at the screen. This was not a glitch. This was an attack. "Find out what she did," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. Serafina looked confused. "What, who did? The press? A rival?" Arthur's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw not a charismatic leader, but a cornered animal. "Eleanor. Find out what Eleanor did." The panic that had started as a cold spike now became a full-blown Arctic current, flooding Arthur's veins. "Get David Kim in here," Arthur commanded, referring to the head of his IT department. "Lock down the building. I want to know who accessed that server." "Mr. Kim is already on his way, sir," Robert said, his face ashen. He He called me. He said it's a level 1 event." A moment later, David Kim, a man who usually looked perpetually stressed, burst in. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Mr. Vance, it's not a hack," Kim said, bypassing all pleasantries. "We've been monitoring the logs since 6 a.m. There's no external breach." "Then what is it? Where are my files?" "They're not just gone, Mr. Vance. The entire virtual server, the Atlas drive, which holds all strategic data, it's been migrated. The data was transferred, and the drive was then digitally decommissioned." "Migrated? Migrated where? Who authorized it?" David Kim swallowed. He was holding a tablet. "That's the problem, sir. The authorization came from the root administrator account, the one that supersedes even your own." Arthur was baffled. "I am the root administrator. My password is Astra King 49. David Kim winced at the terrible password. "No, sir. You have a Tier A admin account. But there's always one root account, the one that created the system. We've never had to access it. It's just been there. The user ID is encrypted. It's just 2 letters." "Which 2? Arthur demanded. "EK." Arthur stared. "EK?" It meant nothing to him. "Who is EK? Find them." "I can't," David said, his voice rising in panic. "The account is secured with a 256-bit encryption key that's not stored on our system. It's on a physical hardware token, and that's not all. The Atlas server itself. The physical hardware, it's not even in the building." "What do you mean it's not in the building? I paid $1 million for that server room." "The old servers are there, sir. The ones we use for email and daily operations. But the Atlas system, I've tracked the work order. It was a proprietary Blade server. It was installed in 2007 by a private contractor. According to this," he tapped his tablet, "it was physically removed from the premises at 4:15 this morning by a bonded tech team. The work order was signed by Marcus Cole." Marcus. It all came back to Marcus and EK. Arthur's mind was racing, trying to connect dots that wouldn't. EK. He remembered a joke decades ago in their first tiny one-bedroom apartment. Eleanor had been poring over blueprints, a textbook on structural engineering beside her. He'd been frustrated, wanting to go out. "You and your books," he'd scoffed. "You're like the keystone of this whole boring operation." She had smiled, a rare, private smile. "The keystone holds everything up, Arthur. Don't forget that. Eleanor Keystone." It was the name of the dummy corporation she'd set up to hold the patent for a small software she'd written, something about property taxes. He'd thought it was a cute hobby. His blood ran cold. Atlas. That was the name of the software. It wasn't just a server drive, it was her software. The proprietary algorithm that analyzed zoning laws, demographic shifts, and material costs. The system he took credit for in Forbes, calling it his instinct, digitized. He always assumed his IT team had built it. He scrambled for his phone, his hands shaking. He didn't call Marcus. He called his personal lawyer, Stephen Grant. "Stephen, thank God! I need you to file an injunction. Now, Eleanor, she's stealing from me." There was a long, cold silence on the other end of the line. "Stephen, did you hear me?" "I heard you, Arthur." Stephen's voice was flat, devoid of its usual collegial warmth. "Well, get it done. She's locked me out of my own company. She and Marcus Cole." "Arthur," Stephen said, and his voice was heavy, "I'm afraid I can't do that. As of 9 a.m. this morning, my firm no longer represents Vance Global. Or you, personally." "What? I've had you on retainer for 15 years. "Yes, and I've always appreciated the business. But a conflict of interest has arisen." "What conflict?" My firm has, for 20 years, held the charter for Keystone Holdings LLC. My primary fiduciary duty is to that client. And as of this morning, Keystone has called in its primary operational loan to Vance Global Properties. Arthur sank into his chair. He couldn't feel his legs. What loan? We're liquid. We're fine. No, Arthur, you're not. You're heavily leveraged. You always have been. You've been funding your acquisitions, your payroll, even this building, through a revolving line of credit extended by Keystone Holdings. You signed the original agreement in 2005, the one you famously told me you didn't have time to read, because you had a tea time. You just wanted to know where to sign. Arthur was suffocating. Keystone, that's my holding company. I control it. No, Arthur, Stephen said, and the pity in his voice was like acid. You never did. You are the CEO of Vance Global, a C Corp. You own 10% of the voting shares. The other 90%, the controlling interest, has always been held by Keystone Holdings, and the sole signatory, the sole owner and beneficiary of that blind trust, is Eleanor Keystone Vance. I'm sorry, Arthur. Your company is in default. As of this moment, it's insolvent. Don't sign anything. The line clicked dead. Arthur sat in the silence. Serafina and Robert were staring at him, their faces masks of terror. His company wasn't his office wasn't his life wasn't his. It all belonged to E.K. It all belonged to Eleanor. Arthur Vance moved like a ghost. He pushed past the stunned Serafina and Robert, left his office, and took the public elevator down. He didn't know where he was going. He was on autopilot, his mind a roaring void. He drove his Bentley, one of the few things he owned outright, towards their Greenwich estate. He needed to find her. He needed to what? Yell? Beg? When he reached the 20-foot-high wrought-iron gates, he punched in his security code. Invalid code. Access denied. He hammered the keypad again. Invalid code. He sat in his car, staring at the house he'd bought for her, and realized he was locked out. The humiliation from the guard at the office was nothing. This was a total, systematic erasure. He got out of the car, his legs unsteady. He found a section of the stone wall that was lower and, in his $2,000 suit, ignominiously climbed over it, ripping the fabric. He stumbled onto the perfectly manicured lawn and ran to the front door. It was locked. He used the spare key, hidden under a stone planter. It slid into the lock but wouldn't turn. The locks had been changed. Crying out in a raw animal sound of rage and despair, he ran around the back to the patio. The sliding glass door was, mercifully, unlocked. He stepped inside. The house was cavernously empty, but it wasn't empty of furniture. His massive, gaudy sofas were still there. His trophies for Developer of the Year were still on the shelves. His 8-foot-tall portrait in the foyer was still hanging. Her things were gone. The abstract, challenging paintings she loved were gone, leaving pale squares on the walls. His hunting scenes and portraits of himself remained. Her vast collection of first-edition architecture and philosophy books was gone from the library. Only his thrillers and business biographies were left. Her office, usually a cluttered creative space, was sterile. The desk was clear. The computers were gone. All her clothes were gone from the vast walk-in closet. All her jewelry from the safe. All that was left was his own sprawling, disorganized mess. He had built a shrine to himself, and she had simply evacuated. She had taken her life out of his, leaving him alone with the empty, vulgar shell he had created. On the massive, cold marble island in the kitchen, an island he'd insisted on, though she'd said it was impossibly impractical, was a single plain white envelope. His name, Arthur, was written on it in her precise architectural script. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely open it. He expected a letter, a torrent of anger, a heartbroken plea. Inside was no letter, just a single plastic keycard. It was a simple white card with no logo. On it, written in the same black marker, was an address, 1124, Birch Street, 6th floor. He knew the address. It was the first office space they had ever rented, 2 decades ago. A tiny 3-room suite in a run-down, pre-war brick building downtown, in a neighborhood that hadn't gentrified yet. He'd hated the place. It was cramped, the heating was unreliable, and it smelled like dust. He'd insisted they move into a glass high-rise the second they'd landed their first big contract. He thought they had sold that building years ago. He drove, breaking every speed limit. He parked his Bentley on the cracked pavement of Birch Street, a stark contrast to the graffiti and an old bodega. He entered the building. The lobby was the same, worn-out terrazzo flooring, a dim, buzzing light. He found the elevator and swiped the card. The light turned green. The elevator, old and creaking, began its ascent. When it reached the 6th floor, the top floor, the doors slid open. This was not the office he remembered. The dusty, cramped suite was gone. The entire floor had been gutted. It was now a high-tech, glass-walled command center, humming with the quiet power of dozens of high-end servers. 20 people he vaguely recognized from the finance and data analysis departments at Vance Global, were working with intense, quiet focus. They were plugged into data streams he didn't recognize. The walls were covered in monitors displaying market data, architectural blueprints, and legal documents. It was a war room, and in the center of it all, at a sleek, minimalist standing desk, was Eleanor. She was not the wallpaper wife from the party. She was wearing a tailored navy blue pantsuit. Her hair was pulled back tightly. She was on the phone, a wireless earpiece in. She held a stylus, making notes on a large touch screen that showed the floor plan of the Meridian project. Marcus Cole was standing beside her, pointing to a data point on a screen. She finished her call. "No, tell Clarissa the capital is secure. We are exercising Article 4 of the partnership agreement. The Vance brand is compromised. We are moving all assets, patents, and contracts to the new entity. Effective immediately. Yes. Meridian. It's done." She clicked off the call and finally, turned her eyes to Arthur. Her gaze was not angry. It was not sad. It was diagnostic. It was the look she'd given the cracked foundation of a building they were assessing. She was judging his structural integrity and finding him wanting. "Arthur," she said, her voice echoing in the high-tech space. "You're late. But that's not new." "Eleanor," he breathed, the word torn from him. "What is this? What have you done?" "I'm glad you asked," she said, stepping out from behind the desk. "You're here to listen. You will not interrupt." "Marcus, will you make sure he doesn't interrupt?" Marcus Cole, a man Arthur had always considered a harmless bean counter, stepped forward. He looked formidable. "Sit down, Arthur," Marcus said. It was not a request. Arthur, his legs giving out, collapsed into a steel and leather chair. The execution was about to begin. Eleanor walked to the front of the room, standing before a large, blank smart screen. She tapped it, and it lit up with a timeline. "You're a man who loves stories, Arthur," she began, her voice cold and even, like a lecturer's. "Especially your own. The man with $5,000 and a dream. It's a great story. Compelling. But it's fiction. Now, You will listen to the truth." She pointed to the start of the timeline, year 2005. 20 years ago, you had $5,000 and a rented suit. She tapped the screen, and a bank statement appeared, had $2.4 million in a trust, an inheritance from my grandmother, a woman who believed in women's education and shrewd investments. You had charisma. I had a dual degree in systems engineering and finance from Wharton. Arthur opened his mouth, but a look from Marcus silenced him. "We made an agreement, Arthur. Do you remember? In that tiny apartment on Birch Street, right here on this floor. You said, 'Ellie, I can sell. I can be the face. You're no good with people. You're too quiet.' And you were right. I hated the schmoozing. I just wanted to build. So we made a deal." She advanced the timeline. "I founded Keystone Holdings, LLC. I used my inheritance to provide 100% of the seed capital for a new company, Vance Global Properties. You were given a 10% stake and the title of CEO. Your job was to be the face, the brand. My job was to do everything else." The screen changed. It showed the code for the Atlas program. "This," she said, "is Atlas, my postgraduate thesis. It's not a property analysis tool, you fool. It's a predictive economic modeling system. It analyzes demographic shifts, zoning law precedents, materials futures, and political sentiment to predict neighborhood growth 5, 10, and 20 years out. It's why we never lost money, even in the 2008 crash. It's why we bought in the warehouse district in 2010, when everyone else was selling. This algorithm, this ghost in the machine, is the entire engine of Vance Global, and it belongs exclusively to Keystone Holdings." She kept clicking. Financial charts appeared. Every loan, every line of credit, every bold acquisition you took credit for. It was all financed internally by Keystone. You weren't a risk-taker, Arthur. You were a man on the world's most generous allowance. You were, in effect, my highest-paid employee, a mascot for the brand. "Ellie." "No," he whispered. "My name is Eleanor," she snapped, and the ice in her voice made him flinch. "You brought up Clarissa Dunn. You told Marcus to call her. Clarissa Dunn was my roommate at Wharton. She didn't invest in Vance Global. She invested in me. The Blackwood Capital deal was contingent on my personal oversight." "Marcus?" Marcus Cole stepped forward. "I was hired by Eleanor in 2007. My employment contract, my loyalty, and my non-disclosure agreement are with Keystone Holdings, not Vance Global. For 18 years, I have managed 2 sets of books, the public-facing ones for Vance Global and the private, consolidated ones for Keystone." You lied to me," Arthur said, his voice cracking. "All of you." "Did we?" Eleanor walked closer to him. "Or did you simply stop seeing me? Did you stop asking? When was the last time you asked me about the boring details, Arthur? 10 years ago? 15? You were too busy accepting awards, posing for magazines, and entertaining new blood, like Miss Hayes." The mention of Serafina hit him like a slap. "I loved you," she said, and for the first time, a flicker of the old Eleanor, the quiet woman at the party, was in her voice. It was raw pain. And it worked. I didn't mind the background. I just wanted to build. I was proud of what we built. But then you started to believe it. You started to believe you were the visionary. You started to look at me, the woman who designed and financed the stage you were standing on, with contempt. You thought I was a relic, an anchor. She stood directly in front of him now, looking down at the broken man in the chair. You didn't just shame your wife at that party, Arthur. You shamed your partner, your banker, your strategist, and your boss. She turned away from him. And an anchor isn't just a weight, you arrogant fool. It's the one point of contact with solid ground. It's the only thing that stops the ship from being dashed on the rocks in a storm. And you cut the line, in front of the whole world. Arthur stumbled to his feet. The room was spinning. He was looking at a stranger. This woman, this cold, brilliant, ruthless executive, was not the Ellie he had ignored for a decade. "Eleanor, please," he begged, the word scraping his throat. It was a mistake, a stupid, drunken joke. It was the champagne. It was Serafina. She got in my head. I didn't mean it. We can fix this. I'll issue a press release. I'll tell the world the truth. That it was all you. Eleanor let out a short, harsh laugh. You'll do no such thing. Firstly, you are bound by the most ironclad, non-disclosure agreement Stephen Grant has ever written, the one you signed in 2005. If you breathe a word of Keystone's involvement, I will personally see you in prison for the rest of your life. You will not slander me, and you will not take credit for my work. But our company, it was never your company, she said, the finality in her voice crushing him. As of 9 a.m. this morning, Keystone Holdings has called in its loans. Vance Global Properties is insolvent. It's bankrupt. As the CEO, you will be named in the bankruptcy filings. The press you love so much will have a field day. Bankrupt? No. He thought of the Astra Tower. His name, his legacy. Everything. It's all gone. The debt is gone, Eleanor corrected him. Or rather, it's all been consolidated onto your books. The assets, however, are perfectly fine. The patents, the properties, the Atlas system, the client contracts, they were all collateral. And Keystone has, as of an hour ago, legally seized all of them. They have been transferred to my new holding company. She gestured to the largest screen. A logo he'd never seen flickered to life. A sleek, silver M. Meridian Strategic Properties, Eleanor announced. The new entity, all our clients, including Blackwood Capital, have already been notified. Clarissa was thrilled to hear I was finally putting my own name on the letterhead. Our key staff, she gestured to the focused team around them, have all signed their new employment contracts with Meridian. They were given the choice. They chose, wisely, to follow the architect, not the figurehead. Arthur looked around at the faces. David Kim from IT, the top data analysts. They wouldn't even look at him. They were already busy, working for her. What am I left with? He whispered, the full, horrifying scope of his oblivion finally setting in. Eleanor picked up a tablet and read from it, as if discussing a property line. You are left with the Vance Global brand, which, after the news of your spectacular public humiliation of your wife, followed by your immediate bankruptcy, is toxic and worthless. You are left with your 10% of a now-defunct company. You are left with your personal effects, and your personal debts, which are substantial. I've had a forensic accounting team on your personal expenses for 6 months. Her eyes hardened. Which brings us to Ms. Hayes. I had a severance package delivered to her apartment this morning. It included a copy of the receipts for the business trips to the Caymans, the jewelry you bought on the company card, and the lease you co-signed on her apartment. It also included a notice that Meridian Strategic will be suing her for misappropriation of corporate funds if she ever contacts you, or anyone at this company, again. I don't imagine she'll be sticking around a broke, disgraced man. She's ambitious, after all. He had nothing. He had no company, no money, no mistress, no home. The penthouse, he stammered. The house? The Greenwich estate is a Keystone asset. It's already being listed. The penthouse at the Astra Tower is in your name, but it's leveraged against the default. It will be seized by the creditors, which again is me. You have 48 hours to vacate. Robert, she said, not to him, but to his former assistant, who was now working at a terminal. Please validate Mr. Vance's parking. She turned her back on him, a final, brutal dismissal. Okay, people, Eleanor said to her new team, her voice ringing with energy. Let's get back to work. We have a $200 million deal to close. Arthur Vance stood alone in the center of the humming room, an irrelevant ghost in the machine he'd never known existed. He stumbled back to the elevator, his reflection in the glass doors showing him not a king, not a visionary, but just a man. A fool who had been given a kingdom and had torn it down, stone by stone, because he was too arrogant to see the architect who had been holding his hand and holding up the walls the entire time. He had shamed his wife, and in doing so, he had authored his own end. The creak of the old elevator descending from the 6th floor of 1124 Birch Street was the sound of Arthur Vance's world ending. He stood numbly inside the rattling metal box, his reflection a pale, ghostly mask in the scratched stainless steel door. The man staring back at him was a stranger. His custom suit was ripped at the knee from climbing his own wall. His eyes were hollow, and his face, usually so ruddy and confident, was the color of ash. When the doors opened onto the building's worn terrazzo lobby, the buzzing fluorescent light felt like an assault. He stumbled out onto the cracked pavement of the sidewalk. The city he once claimed as his own, his skyline, seemed to mock him. The skyscrapers, including his own Astra Tower in the distance, were sharp, indifferent fingers pointing at a sky that was suddenly too bright. He got into the Bentley. His hands shook so violently he dropped the keys twice. When he finally managed to start the engine, the purr of the V12, a sound that once filled him with a sense of godlike power, was now just a low, mournful noise. He had nowhere to go. He pulled out his phone, driven by a masochistic impulse. The screen lit up with a wildfire of alerts. Bloomberg. Vance Global Files for Chapter 11. Bankruptcy amidst leadership collapse. Financial Times. The Vance Empire in freefall. CEO Arthur. Vance ousted. Assets seized by shadow lender. The Post. He's an anchor. Vance's anniversary speech goes viral as company implodes. The last one had a video clip attached. He didn't need to watch it. He drove. He had no destination. He was a ghost in a very expensive machine. He tried to call Serafina. He needed a voice, an ally, even a co-conspirator. The call went straight to a generic automated message. The number you have dialed has been disconnected, or is no BLOCKED. Eleanor had been right. She was gone. He tried to call his lawyer, Stephen, the firm's main line. Grant, Miller and Hayes, how may I direct your call? I need to speak to Stephen Grant. It's Arthur Vance. A click. A moment of silence. I'm sorry, sir. Mr. Grant is in a meeting. He will be unavailable indefinitely. Click. He was an island, and the tide was rising. Eventually, he found himself parked across the street from the Astra Tower, his monument, his tomb. He watched for an hour as a stream of sleek black cars pulled up. He saw Clarissa Dunn get out of one, followed by Ethan Reed, his rival. They weren't going to a party. They were walking into his building, which he now knew was her building, to meet with her. He spent that night in the back seat of his Bentley, parked in a dimly lit garage, the supple leather seats a cold, uncaring cradle. He was 55 years old, and he had nothing but the clothes on his back and a car that he'd probably have to sell by the end of the week. The visionary was a vagrant. 6 months passed. Winter had come to the city, stripping the trees bare. Arthur Vance sat in a small, furnished studio apartment above a laundromat. The room smelled of stale coffee and fabric softener. He had sold the Bentley, the Tom Ford suits, the Patek Philippe watch. He lived off the proceeds, which were dwindling with alarming speed. He was on a second-hand laptop, scrolling through a job site. He had tried to find work. He was Arthur Vance, after all. He had built an empire. But his name was not just toxic. It was a joke, a byword for hubris. In one disastrous interview for a mid-level consulting gig, the hiring manager, a man half his age, had looked at his resume and had the audacity to ask, "So, Mr. Vance, what exactly was it you did at your old company?" Arthur had no answer. He looked out his grimy window at the street below. A newsstand at the corner had a new magazine on display. He could see the cover even from here. It was Forbes, the Person of the Year issue. The cover was not a studio portrait. It was a photograph, vibrant and full of life, taken on a windswept construction site. A woman stood in the center, her dark hair pulled back under a white, hard hat. She was wearing practical boots and a tailored peacoat, and she was laughing, her head tilted back, as she reviewed a set of blueprints with a group of engineers. Her face, which he had once called plain, was the most radiant, powerful thing he had ever seen. The headline was simple: "The Architect, Eleanor Vance, on Building a Better World. Meridian Strategic Shapes the Future." He read the smaller text below it. "From the shadows of a broken empire, the true visionary emerges." Arthur let the curtain fall. He sat back on his sagging mattress, the silence of the room pressing in on him. He felt no rage. He felt no anger. That had burned out months ago, leaving nothing but a cold, hollow void. He finally understood. He wasn't the man who had lost an empire. He was just the guy who had been married to the woman who built one. He was a footnote in her story. He was, as he had so prophetically declared, the anchor, and he had been cut loose, left to sink into the silt, while her ship, light and free, finally sailed on. 50 stories above the city, in a bright, open-plan office that prioritized light and collaboration, Eleanor Vance stood at a smart screen. The Meridian Strategic logo, a subtle silver M, was projected behind her. The room was full of investors, city planners, and the entire Blackwood Capital team. "The problem with the Vance Global model," Eleanor said, her voice clear and confident, "was that it was built on a singular, toxic idea. That a building is a monument to its owner. It was about ego. It was about height. It was hollow." She clicked to a new slide, showing a stunning, green-infused design of the new Meridian project. It was not a single phallic tower, but a series of interconnected buildings, woven with public parks, affordable housing units, and sustainable energy systems. "Meridian builds for communities," she continued. "Our Atlas system isn't just predicting financial growth, it's predicting human need. We are projecting a 40% reduction in energy use, a 30% increase in access to public green space, and a 15% increase in local small business retention. We're not just building property, we're building a neighborhood." "Clarissa?" Clarissa Dunn smiled. "Meridian's numbers are the most solid I've ever seen. Blackwood is doubling our investment. We are all in." The room broke into applause. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, warm smile. Marcus Cole, now her COO, handed her a tablet. "The zoning just cleared," he murmured. "It's a green light." "Good," she said, nodding. "Excellent. Let's get to work." She looked out the window. Her window. From here, she could just see the small brick building on Birch Street, where it all began. She had kept the 6th-floor war room as a reminder of her silence and a reminder of her strength. She was not a queen. She was not a victim. She was an architect, and she was, at long last, just getting started. Arthur Vance learned the hard way that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. He traded a kingdom for a punchline. By the time he realized his wife wasn't just in his shadow, but that she was the one casting it, it was too late. His empire was gone. His name was a disgrace, and Eleanor Vance was on the cover of Forbes, finally credited as the silent genius he had tried to erase. It's a brutal lesson. Never mistake a partner's silence for submission or their quiet support for weakness. They just might be the ones who own the company. What did you think of Arthur's spectacular downfall? Was Eleanor's revenge justified, or was it too cold? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you loved this story and want more real-life drama, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good twist, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We have new stories coming for you every week.